If you've ever tried to lose weight by simply eating less and moving more, then you probably noticed something quite frustrating. It worked for a while and then it stopped. And you're not alone in that, because there's something really strange going on here. There are some national food surveys in the UK that have shown that we've actually been consuming fewer calories per day since the 1970s. The estimated daily calorie intake has dropped, yet during that exact same period, obesity rates have tripled and type 2 diabetes has exploded. So if we're eating less, then why are we getting sicker? Well, the answer isn't that calories don't matter, they obviously do, but the model that we've been using to understand them is missing something fundamental. And what we missed has shaped decades of failed diet advice. It's confused millions of people trying to lose weight, and it's turned a biological problem into a moral one. Hi, I'm Dr. Alex, and over the last decade working in emergency medicine, I've watched the downstream consequences of this misunderstanding about weight and metabolism walk through the doors every single day. I'm talking about heart attacks and strokes, amputations from diabetes, yes, literally, conditions that in many cases trace back to how we've been taught to think about food and body weight. Recently, I've become a bit obsessed with this sort of thing and the science that actually explains what's happening, not just what sounds logical. And I want to share that with you because this is the kind of information that doctors simply don't get taught in medical school. And that's not fair on you. All I ask in return is that if you learn something new today, then please subscribe to the channel. It really does help this reach the people who need it most. So where did this all start? Well, the calories in, calories out model didn't come from nowhere. It emerged from legitimate science and the turn of the 20th century, specifically from a chemist called Wilbur Atwater, who wanted to measure the energy content of food. Now, his method was fairly straightforward. It was to burn food in a device called a bomb calorimeter, measure how much heat it releases, and assign it a calorie value. Carbohydrates and protein gave roughly 4 calories per gram. Fat gave 9, and alcohol gave 7. This system worked brilliantly for its original purpose, which was understanding energy balance in a controlled lab setting and preventing malnutrition during times of scarcity. It gave us a framework that made intuitive sense. If you consume more energy than you burn, then the excess gets stored. If you burn more than you consume, then you lose weight. Simple, right? From a physics standpoint, this is accurate. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, but here's where it gets complicated. The assumption baked into this model was that the human body behaves like a simple furnace, that all calories are interchangeable and that your metabolism is a passive accounting system. And for short-term changes in body weight, especially in controlled conditions, this assumption holds reasonably well. If you lock someone in a metabolic ward and you strictly control their food intake, then yes, you can predict weight changes with fairly decent accuracy based on calorie balance. But the problem is that your body isn't a closed system operating in a lab. It's a dynamic, biological organism with hormones, feedback loops, and survival mechanisms that evolved over millions of years. When you eat food, those calories don't enter a neutral environment. They enter a hormonal system that decides what happens next. And the most important player in that system is insulin. Now, insulin, as I've mentioned many times before, is a storage hormone. It's released primarily in response to carbohydrate intake, and its job is to move glucose out of your bloodstream and into your cells either for immediate use or for storage. When insulin levels are elevated, your body is in storage mode. Fat breakdown is suppressed and energy gets locked away. When insulin drops, fat stores become accessible again, and your body can burn them for fuel. This means that 200 calories of table sugar and 200 calories of chicken breast might contain the same amount of energy on paper, but they trigger completely different metabolic responses. The sugar spikes insulin sharply, promoting storage and suppressing fat oxidation. The protein causes a minimal insulin response. It requires significant energy just to digest, and it promotes satiety through different hormonal pathways. The calorie count is identical, but the biological outcome isn't. This is at the heart of the carbohydrate insulin model, which researchers like Gary Taubes and David Ludwig have championed for years, though it remains debated. Kevin Hall, who's pretty famous at the NIH, has published metabolic ward studies testing this directly. And while he's found that low-carb diets don't create this dramatic fat loss advantage that some predicted, he's also confirmed that insulin absolutely influences fat storage dynamics. The point isn't that calories don't count, it's that the hormonal context determines how aggressively your body holds onto them. Even if we accept that hormones matter, there's another layer that breaks down the simple calories in, calories out framework. That is that food quality changes how much you spontaneously eat in the first place. Ultra-processed foods, anything in a packet, sugary cereals, sandwiches, ready meals, pizzas, all of these are engineered to be hyperpalatable, low in fiber, and incredibly easy to consume quickly. They also tend to be less filling per calorie, meaning that you can eat a lot of them before your brain registers fullness. Kevin Hall ran this fascinating randomized controlled trial in 2019 where he brought people into the NIH metabolic ward and fed them either an ultra-processed diet or a minimally processed whole food diet. Both diets were matched for calories, for sugar, fat, fiber, and macronutrients. On paper, they were identical. But when people were allowed to eat as much as they wanted, those on the ultra-processed diet spontaneously consumed about 500 extra calories per day compared to those eating whole foods. They weren't trying to overeat, they weren't less disciplined. The food itself drove the behavior. When they switched to the whole food diet, their intake dropped naturally without effort. And this tells us something really critical. Calorie counting assumes that willpower can override biology, but food structure influences how much we want to eat before conscious control ever gets involved. The calories didn't change, the food did, and that changed everything. This also helps to explain the confusion from the start of the video. National surveys suggest that calorie intake has fallen, but they rely on self-reported data. As food has become more industrially processed, more hyperpalatable, and easy to eat quickly, people consume more calories without realizing it, and they systematically underreport those calories. The problem isn't that calories stopped mattering, it's that industrial food changed how we consume them. Now let's talk about what happens when you do successfully restrict calories for weight loss. Now, for the first few weeks or months, it works. You lose weight, you feel lighter, maybe you have more energy, and that's great, but then something shifts. The weight loss slows down or stops entirely, even though you're still eating the same reduced amount. And you start feeling hungrier, more tired, colder. And that's really important. Your body isn't broken, it's responding exactly as it evolved to. When you lose weight, your resting metabolic rate drops. Some of that is expected because a smaller body requires less energy to maintain. But the drop is often larger than predicted, a phenomenon called metabolic adaptation. Your body downregulates thyroid hormones, it reduces spontaneous movement, and it increases production of ghrelin, the hunger hormone. It interprets calorie restriction as a threat to survival, and it mounts a coordinated defense to restore lost weight. This was documented dramatically in the follow-up to the TV show The Biggest Loser, published by researchers like Kevin Hall and Darcy Fothergill in 2016. Contestants lost massive amounts of weight through extreme dieting and exercise, but 6 years later, most of them had regained it. And the metabolisms hadn't recovered. They were burning significantly fewer calories per day than people of the same size who had never lost weight. Their bodies were fighting to get the weight back, and hunger was relentless. This is physiology. The body defends a set point, and chronic calorie restriction triggers biological resistance that willpower can't overcome long term. At this point, you might be thinking, well, if eating less doesn't work long term, then what about moving more? And here's where we hit another uncomfortable truth. Exercise is absolutely essential for health. It protects your heart, it strengthens your bones, it improves insulin sensitivity, it boosts your mood, but it's surprisingly ineffective for weight loss when used in isolation. That's not because exercise doesn't burn calories, clearly it does, but your body compensates in ways that we didn't predict. Herman Pontzer's research on energy expenditure has actually shown that people who increase their physical activity often unconsciously reduce their movement later in the day. You go for a run in the morning and then you sit more in the afternoon. Or your appetite increases to match the energy that you've burned. The body treats total daily energy expenditure as a constrained variable rather than an open-ended one. Pontzer calls this the constrained energy model, and it suggests that past a certain threshold, burning more through exercise doesn't linearly increase total calories out. It just shifts where and when you expend energy. If you add to that the fact that exercise makes you hungrier, especially if you're already in a calorie deficit, then you can see why eat less, move more often fails despite sounding perfectly logical. The problem isn't laziness or even a lack of effort, it's that the model assumes your metabolism is passive when it's actually adaptive. So if all of this is true, then why on earth did we spend decades confidently telling people that weight loss is simply about calorie balance and willpower? Part of the answer lies in how nutrition science was conducted. Much of the early evidence linking diet to obesity came from observational studies that relied on self-reported food intake. Food frequency questionnaires where people try to remember what they ate over the past week or month. These tools are famously inaccurate. People underreport calories, especially from snacks and ultra-processed foods, and those who are overweight tend to underreport more. On top of that, these studies are plagued by confounding variables and healthy user bias. People who report eating more vegetables also tend to exercise more, sleep better, and avoid smoking. Untangling cause from correlation becomes nearly impossible. But the simplicity of calories in, calories out, it was attractive. It fit neatly into public health messaging. It placed responsibility on individual behavior, which aligned with cultural narratives about self-control and personal responsibility. The big food corporations were off the hook. And when people failed to lose weight or keep it off, the conclusion was that they weren't trying hard enough, not that the model was incomplete. This framing turned a biological response to environmental change into a moral failure. And it's caused enormous harm, not just to physical health, but to mental health and the relationship people have with food. So where does that leave us? If counting calories doesn't work, if exercise alone doesn't work, if dieting doesn't work because it triggers metabolic adaptation, then what does work? Well, the answer is shifting focus from calorie quantity to the quality and timing of what you eat, alongside the hormonal and metabolic environment that you create. The first shift here has to be philosophical as much as nutritional. If your goal is to be healthy and live a long life and maintain a normal body weight over decades, not just to look a certain way in the short term, then food quality has to come first. One simple rule captures most of what the science tells us. Don't eat foods that didn't exist 100 years ago. Eat foods that exist naturally, or foods made from a small number of ingredients that you recognize. If a product has a long ingredients list filled with emulsifiers, preservatives, flavor enhancers, or modified starches, then that's a signal. Not because those ingredients are inherently toxic in isolation, but because they mark foods that have been engineered to be easy to overconsume and harder for your biology to regulate. Ultra-processed foods bypass the normal satiety mechanisms. They're softer, faster to eat, less filling per calorie, and often designed to be consumed mindlessly. Now, that's not a moral failing on the part of the person eating them. It's a predictable biological response to industrial food design. And remember, these big food corporations, they don't care about your health. They only care about profits. Removing these foods from your diet doesn't require calorie counting or restraint. It simply removes the stimuli that drive overeating in the first place. This is why learning to cook is so important. Cooking isn't just a lifestyle hobby, it's a metabolic skill. When you cook, you control ingredients, you control portion structure, protein content, fiber, and eating pace. People who cook regularly don't just eat better, they eat in a way that naturally aligns with human physiology. Over a lifetime, this may be one of the most powerful longevity skills that you can develop because it shapes your diet every single day without relying on willpower. Once that foundation is in place, then the next step is to think about macronutrients and physiology. So to start with protein. Protein is the most filling macronutrient. It has the highest thermic effect, meaning that your body burns more calories digesting it, and it helps preserve muscle mass during weight loss, which protects your metabolic rate. Pair that with fiber-rich whole foods that slow digestion, stabilize blood sugar, and keep you fuller for longer. The next step is to minimize ultra-processed foods as much as possible. Not because they're morally bad, this isn't a moral thing, but because they're designed to override satiety signals and drive overconsumption. Eat in patterns that reduce insulin exposure, longer gaps between meals, avoiding constant snacking, considering time-restricted eating if that suits your lifestyle. These strategies work not by forcing your body into submission, but by working with your biology instead of against it. And remember as well, don't ignore sleep, don't ignore stress, and don't ignore your circadian rhythm. Poor sleep disrupts hunger hormones, it increases cravings for high-calorie foods, and it impairs insulin sensitivity. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, which promotes fat storage, especially around the abdomen. Eating late at night when your body expects to be fasting throws off metabolic regulation. These are really important for how your body manages energy. Calories, of course, still matter. If you're in a prolonged energy surplus, then you'll gain weight. But calories are the outcome of these deeper biological processes, not the primary lever that you should be pulling. Let me just end with this. So the whole calories in, calories out model isn't necessarily wrong. It's just incomplete. It describes thermodynamics accurately, but it ignores the hormonal, metabolic, and behavioral realities of being human in this modern food environment. Obesity isn't a failure of maths or lack of discipline. It's a biological response to an evolutionary mismatch. Our ancient physiology colliding with cheap, hyperpalatable, energy-dense food that's available 24 hours a day, and that's not normal. And the solution isn't shaming people into eating less or moving more. It's understanding the systems driving the problem and addressing them intelligently. I really hope you got some value from this video today. This huge, overwhelming issue about food and the modern world that we live in is really complex. And I hope one day doctors are taught this stuff routinely in medical school. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.